input from the incorporation there, because all the black was Mr. Key's original input, and then the other contributions have come from the various TDC, and I apologise to TDC staff. I've been roundly told off for keeping on saying TCDC. It just runs off my tongue, and I apologise for that, because I do spend quite a lot of time in front of TCDC hearings and with TCDC officers, and I've tried to keep it out of my written documents, and I will work harder in my my spoken abbreviations. And then there have been some bits and pieces in red that have gone in from the various trust board people. Now, from our perspective, Ms. Mohi from the trust board has advised she's happy for this document to go, and clearly the councillors too, seeing as they indicated to you that it was at this point. Doesn't look to be anything from anybody's input that is inconsistent or unexpected. And the document that we're preparing at the moment basically incorporates this, the intent of this, but also annexes it, so that if there's any, the intention is that if there's any lack of clarity about the meaning of the agreement, then you've got the aspirations document to help. So that was sort of is the position that we're starting from, and then we'll wait and see what the various lawyers and other officers do with that to pull it to bits. Now, Mr. Council has hot-footed from Rotorua Airport and is available to, and has a short summary that he can provide, and then kick off from there.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and good morning and welcome, Mr. Council. You weren't here this morning, so just to repeat for your benefit that all the pre-circulated material has been read, so that's evidence, rebuttal evidence, joint witness statements, etc. So thanks very much for your participation in some of those processes and for preparing your material for us. We have read all of that, I can assure you, but you have a summary, so we're very happy for you to present that to us, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll run through my summary. It's just over a page. So my economic framework for assessing the Whareroa North development is that of economic efficiency, which I understand is consistent with the RMA and relevant case law, particularly on the efficient use of resources. An outcome that is economically efficient is one that maximises the net benefits to society, that is, the benefits less costs. These net benefits are made up of both private benefits and costs to buyers and sellers directly involved in the development, and public benefits and costs to other members of society. I find that the Whareroa North development will result in positive net private benefits. These benefits are in the form of, firstly, benefits to the proprietors, the trust. This is given by the revenue from the sale of sections minus the costs incurred in the development. Because the proprietors are willing to invest to undertake the development, it's reasonable to assume that the benefits they expect to receive will exceed the expected costs. And secondly, benefits to buyers of sections in the development. This is given by the implicit benefit buyers receive from buying a section less the cost to purchase it. Can be inferred from a purchaser's decision to buy a section in the development that doing so will bring them a benefit, otherwise they would not make a decision to purchase in the first place. These benefits to developers and buyers are reflected in other markets in the Taupo district. For example, profits made by developers are capitalised in investments in infrastructure, benefiting businesses. Benefits to buyers of sections can be reflected in their spending at local businesses in the district. Any public costs to Taupo ratepayers from the Whareroa North development will be relatively small. The costs of the initial infrastructure are incurred by the developers, not Taupo ratepayers. The costs of replacing that infrastructure, which do fall on ratepayers, will be incurred far into the future, in some cases in 50 to 100 years' time. Costs this far into the future are typically not included in an assessment of economic efficiency because it's very difficult to forecast this far into the future, and the present day value of these costs will be minimal. In addition, any depreciation expense incurred by Taupo District Council in relation to the infrastructure is not an economic cost. That is, it does not relate to the use of real resources, so should not be included in an economic efficiency assessment. To include depreciation expenses would double count the infrastructure costs already incurred by the developers. Since there will be a net private benefit and very little public cost, and if other external effects are appropriately managed, I understand these are being assessed by other witnesses, then I conclude that the Whareroa North development is an economically efficient use of resources. This conclusion would hold even if the development results in a transfer of demand from other planned and zoned locations in the district. Firstly, I note the evidence for any such transfer of demand is equivocal. While there could be a transfer of demand if there is an excess supply of residential land, on some scenarios I've assessed there would be a shortage of land, particularly in Whareroa and surrounding areas. Second, even if there is an excess supply of land, we'd likely see prices coming down to eliminate that excess. Indeed, any excess supply should be considered within the context of expected high population growth in the Taupo district, strong demand for new sections in Whareroa when they have been released to the market, and ongoing demand for existing properties, and also strong growth in house prices in the Taupo district and Whareroa in recent years. Third, if there is excess capacity, it means different developments would need to compete for buyers. This would spur developers to offer an improved development and or lower prices. It's consumers that will ultimately be the beneficiaries of that competition. Fourth, there are very few additional public costs arising from any excess capacity. As noted, the initial infrastructure costs are borne by developers, and also the replacement infrastructure is incurred too far into the future to be of relevance. So in summary, I find the Whareroa North development is an efficient use of resources. It will bring a net benefit to the Taupo district with few additional public costs in the relevant time frame. While the evidence of excess capacity in residential land is equivocal, even if there is excess capacity, there will still be a net benefit.
Thank you very much for that. Was that handwritten or typed, that summary?
That was typed.
So if we could have copies of that, that would be wonderful. Thank you. And that can be arranged later. And now I'll just see if we have questions for you. Roseanne, start at your end of the table.
Still good morning, isn't it? Good morning, Mr. Council. I just had a couple of small questions just to help clarify matters in my mind, and they I hope I articulate this correctly. They relate to, I guess, the conversation around the future cost of infrastructure to the community. I take from your conversation that because it's far into the future, those costs, you see them as irrelevant to this economic analysis? That's correct. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. I just put to you, because it has been put to us, that the future costs of these infrastructure, councils have to take that into account in their asset management plans. They have to collect funding over the life of the asset, whether it's 30 or 50 years. It just doesn't happen in year 30 or 50. So does that at all affect your analysis in terms of a relevant time frame? Sorry, am I explaining myself correctly? I guess it's that concept of intergenerational debt, which I know has not been mentioned in any of the papers here, but it is a way that councils collect funding of ratepayers over time to pay for this infrastructure at a point in time when it needs upgrading. But you, in your analysis, you've completely not looked at that at all?
Yeah, well, my analysis takes that perspective of economic efficiency. So from that perspective, we look at any sort of costs when they're incurred. So if there's a cost in terms of actually investing in the infrastructure at the time it's incurred, that would be captured in an economic efficiency assessment. I'm not sure how the council incurs things, and if it's depreciation, it's very different, and I've sort of set that out in my evidence.
Okay. All right. Okay. No, that'll be fine for now. Just wanted to clarify how you'd approach accounting for that. Okay.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you for being here and giving us your evidence. A couple of questions I have. One relates to the future demand for dwellings at Whareroa. There's been quite a lot in the evidence about construction of dwellings as distinct from creation of sites. Now, is it your view that the most relevant indicator of demand for holiday properties, which is what we're broadly talking about here, is that's determined primarily by the creation of sites as opposed to when dwellings are built on them?
Yeah, I think the most relevant indication of demand is, for this particular one, what we're looking at is when they create sites and sell them. So I think creation of sites is probably a better indication of demand.
Okay. And that's on the basis, I think you mentioned in your evidence, that people might purchase a site and then, when their funds allow later on in life, they put a dwelling on it. Okay, and I think you've identified that all the sites in the Whareroa South have been sold to private owners.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to note is that the demand evidence we've looked at is about construction of new dwellings, yet a better indication is probably creation of sites. As I've just said, we don't really have any data on that I'm aware of, apart from the point that when the Whareroa sites in the existing development, when they have come to the market, they've been sold, which suggests strong demand.
Okay, and just to clarify that a bit more, your position is that any of the properties in Whareroa South which are not yet built on are not really available, in your view, for future demand for such properties because they've already been sold?
Yeah, there's a couple of nuances around that, I think. I mean, firstly, they are held by private individuals, so for them to be available, the current landowner would want to sell them, and I think that's slightly in contrast with the development where it's being developed for sale. I don't see the trust sort of sitting on it and holding it. They want to sell these. Having said that, there may be some where landowners have no intention of building on them or using them for their own use, so are seeing them as a possible development. So there may be some of that, but the evidence I've sort of set out is a lot of them look like there is an intention to build on them or existing building happening on them, which would rule them out as being part of that supply.
Okay, thank you for that. And you've identified, and various estimates have been made, that most of the demand, or most of the sites in Whareroa South and indeed in Whareroa and Moria are owned by persons or entities who aren't resident in Taupo district. They're outsiders, basically, who own the sites.
Yes, yeah, I understand most of the Whareroa residents. There's not many permanent residents in Whareroa, so I think you can infer from that most of them are owned by those outside. Yeah.
Okay, so on the basis that there's been quite a lot of effort put into looking at the demand or the growth in resident population in Taupo district itself, but most of the ownership of those sites is by people who don't reside in Taupo district. I suppose I have a few questions about the relevance of the resident population growth in Taupo district, and I just wondered whether the future population growth in places like Auckland and Hamilton and other parts of Waikato may be a somewhat better indicator of future demand growth for holiday sites. For any comment on that?
Yeah, so in terms of the relevance of looking at the sort of Taupo district, and I've covered this in my evidence, I think it provides some context gives us a feel for what's happening in the broader district, and that sort of helps go towards sort of future demand and things like that. But agree, I don't think as much weight should be placed on it. I think more weight should be placed on looking specifically in Whareroa and those holiday home sites. In terms of whether growth in areas like Auckland and Hamilton provides a better indication of demand, possibly. I mean, I haven't looked at that. The other aspect of it, I think, would be trying to isolate almost whether there's sections of society that have a greater demand for holiday homes themselves, and this might be, I don't know, higher income brackets perhaps, and looking around that. So those are aspects, but I haven't looked at that data.
Okay, thank you for that. And but there's no estimate that you've made in terms of future demand specifically for holiday properties as a subset of demand for properties in Taupo district. You haven't been able to look down that sort of the extra level of detail.
Well, I have looked at demand for construction of new dwellings in Whareroa.
Yes.
That's probably the closest in terms of demand for holiday properties.
Okay. Right, so it could be that demand for holiday properties is faster or slower than the overall population growth in Taupo district. And you don't have any estimate of that.
Yeah, yes, that's right. We don't have an estimate of it. I think some of the evidence we've got, or probably the best evidence we've got, is that properties in Whareroa have always, in the Whareroa South part of it, the existing ones have sold, and there has been ongoing demand for existing properties, so not the sections but existing properties in Whareroa as well. I think in one of my reports it was something like 6 per year for the last couple of years. So suggests there is that ongoing demand.
Okay, thank you for that. And final question, in your evidence in chief you identified rates revenue generated by any new sites as likely to be a net benefit. And that's on the basis that rates revenue would increase at the time the sites were created, because they would become individual
Yes,
sites.
and I've since had that clarified for me slightly, and I think I answered one of the questions in the things. Probably it's more nuanced than what I gave, in that I think I mentioned there is once sections are created they get half charges. I don't think that's quite right. I think the rates are fully levied on most aspects apart from half charges on wastewater and water perhaps. I think, yeah.
Right, thank you. And have you generated any estimate of what the additional rates revenue to council might be from creation of the sites?
No.
And have you, for example, looked at the current rates revenue from sites in Whareroa South or anything like that?
No. I think I would just want to clarify on the rates. If we take a broad approach, rates are generally considered to be a transfer, I think, transfer payments. So households pay rates, the district council receives rates, and there's no net effect. There is underlying benefits and costs in terms of the infrastructure, for example, that's used, and the benefits that are received from that, but those are kind of separately assessed in terms of the cost of the infrastructure to the landowners and the benefits that accrue to home buyers and able to use infrastructure. So that the rates payment itself is a transfer and wouldn't be a net benefit. But what I noted in my evidence was if the analysis was just restricted to the Taupo district, so that where it's a transfer, that's kind of taking a broad, almost New Zealand approach. If the analysis is just restricted to the Taupo district, then there may be an argument that ratepayers outside of the district, and the Taupo district obviously lies inside it, so that the transfer comes into the district, and so that would be a benefit in that case.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
I've just got one issue I'd like to explore with you, and it's occurred to me as I've been reading through the evidence of yourself and the economist employed by the council as part of the 42A team, that there's quite a lot of focus on demand and whether or not there is adequate demand for a new release of sections at Whareroa, and quite a lot of what I'd call forensic analysis of that, probably more than I'm used to seeing in a process such as this. And the question in my mind is, is this usual to have this level of forensic attention to estimates or speculations about future demand? And particularly that was reinforced for me yesterday on the site visit on the way home. The driver of our vehicle, who's a council employee, reminded us that there's a large area of land at Turangi that's been zoned residential by the council itself and is yet to be developed, because I suppose there's no demand for it, or the owners of that land don't want to turn it into residential sections. In your experience, is it usual to have this level of forensic attention paid to whether or not there's demand, or is it more usual for that just to be left to the market?
Well, I think my position is that the market or the developers have got the best feel for what demand is, and as a starting point, we can sort of be guided by developers almost in terms of where there will be demand, and if there will be demand for their properties. On the kind of some of those fundamental propositions, I said out of my evidence that if there was going to be no demand, and if developers weren't actually going to sell sections, why would they stake their investment in it in the first place? They obviously want to make a profit from it. So we can be guided by demand in the first instance. And I think in terms of the kind of level of forensic analysis, I agree to an extent. It is quite detailed. If we sort of take that starting proposition, we may not necessarily need that. I guess I was sort of partly responding to the evidence of Mr. Osborne to kind of critique that. Does that answer the question? Or?
Yeah, and the question wasn't a criticism of you. It was just a layperson's query as to whether or not this level of investigation of potential demand was normal or not for a proposal such as this.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, as I think the level of investigation shows, there's always going to be uncertainty in demand as well. And, economists can sit here and do forecasts and things like that, but really it's not our investment that matters. So I think the developers will certainly have a better feel for that.
Yeah, and I guess my question is founded in kind of a simplistic kind of concept, whereby if a development such as this is to go ahead, then the risk does lie with the developer. If the sections don't sell, then it's no skin off anyone's nose except the developer. Is that a fair kind of layperson's assessment of the situation in your view?
Yes, I think that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, the developer does bear the risk.
Yeah. All right. No, thank you very much for that. No further questions from the panel.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Ms. Lewis is our final witness in terms of the evidence that's been presented. Before you started, Mr. McKenzie and Ms. Connolly had a discussion earlier, and that they were keen that the panel were alert to some matters that related to the naming of streets in particular, and I wondered whether before Joanne starts, if either of you wanted to clarify that.
Sure, go ahead.
Come up, Duncan, so we can have it recorded.
Thanks for the opportunity, and I apologise for not recalling it earlier.
That's fine.
But again, it's the Whareroa that runs with our development. And if you took the opportunity to drive around Whareroa yesterday, you would have noticed all of the significant tupuna names that on the roadways, etc. For instance, Turangi Tukua place, is a hapu name significant to Turangi. Ani Maria place, she's a queer that was the original chairperson of this corporation. When I was thinking about it last night, that's what's really important to us as a people and as a developer, and for our uri yet to come, our mokopuna yet to come. It's important for them and for Parekawa, the hapu of Parekawa. Those names weren't given without any deep consideration, and I just wanted to ensure that you actually had that. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that. I'll just see if that's spurred any further questions. Paul, any further questions?
So, kia ora. It's not a question as such, but thank you for that explanation, because as Māori, I struggled with this when I first read it, because you were selling your land. So I did struggle with that concept, because we wouldn't sell our land unless we were really forced to. So, but your explanation about gifting those names for that whenua has settled that for me. Thank you.
Kia ora.
All right, thanks, Mr. Kenzie. Thanks for clarifying that for us.
Thank you very
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Likewise, I've not prepared a summary. I think you've probably seen sufficient information from me that I needn't add to it unnecessarily, so I'm happy to respond to any queries. I could, if you wish now, to address the matter that was raised immediately prior to the morning tea break regarding Area 2, so-called.
Yep, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
So, as we've learnt more, our approach to Area 2, so-called, has evolved. And so just to remind the panel, Area 2 is about 2 hectares in area, and it's land that's not identified in the Taupo district plan as being of ecological value in terms of being a part of an SNA, but it is an area which the ecologists for Taupo District Council, as well as ourselves, have agreed meet the criteria in the Waikato Regional Policy Statement for significance. And as Ms. Forrett has explained...
Joanne, it might be helpful if you just refer to the specific
area.
figure, yeah, so we can make sure that we're talking about the same piece of land. So could we get that up on the screen even, or if it's easier just to have a look at the specific, because I think we want to make sure that we're all talking about the same
Well,
thing.
we could just talk about that. I could... You mean in reference to the plan on Appendix 8?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, sure.
But yes, if you can get it up on the screen, it'd be good.
Yeah, Hilary, I've already got this. I've got a soft copy. Thanks.
If you're familiar with, perhaps I show it on this, which is part of the Southern Settlement Structure Plan. So it's the red area that's clearly in the aerial photograph beneath it. It has got vegetation on it. So it's the eastern portion of the area proposed to be rezoned.
Yeah, look, I think we're crystal clear
Yes,
what we're talking about here. If I look on Appendix 8, it's that area
That's
there.
correct.
Area
That's
2.
correct.
Yep.
That's correct.
Great. Thank
And
you. Yeah, that one.
when you go to the site, so a bit of history, apparently that area was burnt over by a fire, apparently many years ago. And when you go to the site, you can discern a little bit of difference between the SNA area and that area. And that's also the area that when council brought in its SNA areas in 2000, or just prior to 2008, that the incorporation did challenge because that area was included in the original extent of SNA. So as a result of the challenge, there was a consent order through the Environment Court, and that portion was removed. So that is why it appears in the area to be rezoned, and as I mentioned, the evolution of this process and the evolution of time, I guess, in terms of it regenerating, means that that although it's not in the TD's Taupo District Plan SNA, it meets the criteria within the Waikato Regional Policy Statement. So in our evidence in chief, as I recall, we referred to having houses set in bush in there, and we talked about clusters. Since that time, and largely as a response of the ecologists' called it discussion, in relation to fragmentation, for example, the approach has changed to now protecting a swathe of that bush and likely supplementing it as a result of the ecological investigation work undertaken in stage 1. So that swathe of bush that's shaded in green around the perimeter of that is to be protected and, as I say, potentially enhanced once we get in there and see what's actually in there and the quality of the vegetation there. Leaving the area in the middle to be available for house sites. So purposefully, Appendix 8 is silent as to whether the house sites in the middle may involve retention of some Indigenous vegetation there. But certainly the bottom line is that Appendix 8 leaves open the prospect that apart from the perimeter area to be protected, the interior could be developed for residential sections. Has that answered your query?
No, not really. I kind of knew all that already, but what I'm interested in is what is it going to look like? How many clusters, how many houses, how far apart will they be? Is there any kind of thought given to that, or is it still just all up in the air?
So, as per the rest of the residential subdivision, we've not done the detailed design work in terms of sections and boundaries, etc., and allotments. And clearly stage 1 of the subdivision needs to provide a yield to make it economic. So no, we don't have, we feel that detailed design work in terms of subdivision layout is for the next stage of the process. But at this stage, at the plan change stage, we've put forward the protection of that area of Area 2, the perimeter, as appearing on the Appendix 8 plan. And that protection and potential enhancement is of course referred to in various clauses of Appendix 8, which I could take you through if you wish me to.
Yeah, maybe if you could just draw to our attention the particular elements
Okay.
of Appendix 8 that you feel
So
deal with that issue.
So Appendix 8, Section 2H, which is on page 2, is the specific reference to the broad-leafed forest/scrub area. And Schedule 1 of Appendix 8 is the planting proposal, which provides some information about how that area will be planted and potentially supplemented with new Indigenous vegetation.
Yep.
Sorry to jump around, but going back to part 2 again, I is where there is a reference to offsetting. So clearly, as per the removal of vegetation for the access road through the SNA, the removal of vegetation within Area 2 would also be subject to the ecological mitigation plan and offset planting to compensate for that loss. So little I on page 2 relates to that ecological mitigation plan. And J over the page refers to the legal protection. The second bullet point specifically notes about the broad-leaved forest scrub area, and reference again to supplementing existing indigenous vegetation to remain. And finally, section 5C, which is the outcomes. Again, there's a specific reference in the second part of that, the heading natural and physical environment. Part C there, where it refers to indigenous vegetation which is lost and including from the broadleaf forest scrub area is remedied, mitigated or offset, etc., etc. Five C, and it's the second lot of, the last part of 5C in that table. It's a bullet point that specifically refers to it. Oh, sorry, the second lot of C. Yes, sorry.
All right, thank you for that. So now, is there anything else that you wish to add before we go to questions?
No, there's nothing further that I need to add. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Stephen? Doug? Mm-hmm.
And just, I suppose, clarification from where you're coming from. I sort of note here you've identified in your accumulation sheet very early on that proposals primarily to meet demand for holiday properties. And that's fairly fundamental to your position as I see it in terms of in relation to all the various provisions of the plan and the regional policy statement as distinct from it and a proposal to service just usual resident population growth. Is that a fair observation on my part?
So I think it's a matter of fact that predominantly, overwhelmingly, Whareroa is a holiday settlement, so certainly the expectation going forward is that this development will again attract predominantly holiday
Thank you, I accept that.
settlement.
And I suppose my point was that then your interpretation of the provisions of the plan are taken on that basis, especially in terms of things like
Sorry, I'm not sure I'm grasping your question.
demand for capacity in this location, and the fact that Whareroa is not in, for example, in Taupo town, is an important basis for an interpretation of the various provisions of the district plan and the regional policy statement.
I don't know that the Taupo district plan or the regional policy statement sort of differentiate between what the residential development is for, but certainly in the case of Whareroa, our expectation is that it will be of appeal, as it has been in the last 30 years, to holiday makers as opposed to permanent residents.
Right, yeah, I think that answers my question. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Roseanne, any questions?
I just had one question. Thank you, Joanne. And I just was seeking your thoughts and comments on a point that was made in the legal submissions from the TDC. And I'll just read it out because it's probably simple. It was point 18. It said, if the land is rezoned in the plan change as being suitable for residential zoning, the council would no doubt come under significant pressure to grant such consents or take steps to enable access, because to not come up with solutions might be seen as contrary to its approval of the plan change request. And I was just keen on your thoughts and comments on that particular statement.
Oh, I disagree with that assertion. Clearly, any future resource consent process stands on its own in terms of merits, and I don't think that those sorts of circumstances would have a predetermining influence on the outcome. They certainly shouldn't.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis, you probably gathered from the written questions I put to you that I think that the subdivision consenting process to follow should Plan Change 36 be approved is important, and that all of the potential environmental mitigations of any real importance would be imposed through that process. Hence my question to you, and in response you suggested that further matters of control would be appropriate to be cross-referred to in Rule 4a.3.2. And I think you've gathered from my questions that I see that as particularly important, given that we're looking at a controlled activity for the subdivision consent, so we need to be very sure that the decision maker has ability to impose conditions on all relevant matters, because they don't have discretion to do so unless they are listed. So thanks for responding to that question. When I read your response, I just thought there might be, or there was scope to have yet more matters of control. I had 3 in mind. I'd just like to put those to you and get your feedback from a planning perspective on whether you feel the additional matters of control I'm about to put to you would be desirable, given that I think in this case, with a controlled activity, a belts and braces approach is warranted. So the first matter of additional control I thought would be useful would be one relating to the provision of potable water and wastewater collection and treatment infrastructure and facilities. So just to make sure the decision maker could put their mind to that. The second additional matter of control would be measures to avoid, remedy or mitigate identified natural hazard risks within the residential development footprint, and these are the important words, to a level that is acceptable or tolerable for residential activities. Just bearing in mind the wording there of the RPS in that regard. And the third matter of control from a belts and braces perspective I thought might be useful would be mitigating adverse effects on any archaeological features identified within the residential development footprint. So do you have any, and I know that's difficult to respond on the hoof to that, but do you have any comment that you can give back to us at this stage about those additional matters of control?
So certainly I'm in agreement with the belt and braces approach, because you can't come back later and expand scope of those things. So certainly I'm agreeable with all those 3 matters. The only reservation I'd have is to go back to the wording in the current district plan provisions and make sure, for example, that as a result of including any of those 3, we don't need to alter or some other ones that are already relevant. But perhaps, Sir, you've already, in putting those forward, perhaps you've already considered that. So I'm happy perhaps to provide any further feedback on the detail when I've had a chance to carefully look at them. But certainly in principle, if there are additional matters that could usefully be included, then we'd be very happy to have them included.
Okay, well, great, thanks very much for that. And apart from that, no further questions, and just to repeat again that that's just a result of the amount of pre-circulation of material and also the helpful answers to our written questions, which means that we don't have very many verbal questions to put to the witnesses that we've heard from this morning. And for those of you who are here, who are going to be here tomorrow, I assume that's going to be the case then as well. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last question posed. So in terms
Yeah.
of those 3 additional matters, they were additional to the other matters that Ms Lewis has identified?
Yes, they
within the
were. So
subdivision.
yeah. So what I've assumed is that the additional matters that Ms Lewis had recommended, I think, as part of your rebuttal evidence,
Correct.
the ones I just read out would be
Will
over
be
and above
included.
those ones that Joanne already suggested should be added.
Thank you, sir, for that matter of clarification.
No, you're very welcome. That's a good point. Thank you. So, Dr. Forrett. Yes.
So, I guess we can resume tomorrow when the other submitters are available,
Yep.
and usefully spend our afternoon tidying up any responses that are necessary and dealing with other matters.
Yep.
And it would be quite helpful if we can leave stuff here that we might need to. I'm not sure.
Yep.
What?
All right, and so just in terms of that last issue, Mr. Bonus, that question of clarification, to assist you and Ms. Lewis, what I'll do this afternoon is put those 3 additional matters of control in writing. I'll email them to Carrie, who can then email them to you and to Ms. Lewis, and then Ms. Lewis tomorrow, if you, once you've had a look at that, if you have anything further to add, then you can do that, and Mr. Bonus, then you can give us your thoughts on that as well.
Thank you, sir.
If that would help. Yep. All right, so that brings us to the conclusion of the hearing for today. We've rattled through it pretty quickly. That's just the way of things these days. Dr. Forrett, through you, I'd like to thank yourself and the proponents and all of their witnesses for the assistance that you've given us to date. We do appreciate it. We understand there's a huge amount of work's gone on in the background. As some of your earlier speakers said, it's been a long road for the proponent to get to this stage. We understand and appreciate that, and we do value the input that we've received, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And we'll see everyone tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Oh,
Is there any indication, just so that for logistic
Yeah.
purposes, do you have a feel for whether the number or length of questions you have for tomorrow is likely to be any greater? Because if so, we can abandon the planned lunch and that kind of stuff.
difficult to predict because we're hearing from submitters initially, but I imagine the level of questioning we have for the council's witness will be of a similar level to what we had for your witnesses today, unless any member of the panel has a view otherwise. Concur? Yep. So the level of questions for the Section 42A reporting team will likely be of the same level, but in terms of submitters, I'm not sure because we have a couple of lay submitters, so they may raise extra issues that generate more questions.
Have we had confirmation if those lay submitters are coming?
Yes, so we've got 3 submitters tomorrow, Mr Sanderson, Environment Waikato Regional Council, and Jeff Drayton, who is Desiree Drayton's partner. I was just going to add, we have got lunch coming at 12:15, so we might as well make the most of that.
Sure.
And same for tomorrow, we haven't been able to change the numbers or the catering within 48 hours, so it'll be coming regardless tomorrow, so we might as well use that food.
No, that's fine, so we'll stay here and eat the lunch, that's good.
And those rooms are still available to be used. during that
Excellent.
time.
Right,
Thank you for that.
thank you.
Chair, if I may,
Yes,
since we have some money here,
yeah.
and the council might be able to close it, but I'm more than happy to close this segment about who for us if you so choose.
You know, I think that'd be wonderful, thank you, go ahead.